Iowa State needs to take a page out of NFL Hall of Famer Deion Sanders' book to guarantee they find themselves back in the Big 12 championship next year. We're talking football today on Locked On Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for being here every single day, making this your first watch or listen of the day, wherever you're watching or listening. I appreciate it more than you know. Be sure to subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. It's time to talk football. It's obviously basketball season is over, and we will talk about the transfer portal and all that at some point, but spring ball is here and a lot of news around that. Obviously, we've got to break down Deion Sanders' big idea that is kind of catching fire across the NCAA right now. And should Iowa State become involved? Then in the second segment, we're going to talk about kind of what's going on the offensive side of the ball. And then finally, to round things out, we'll bring up the defense. And so it's going to be a fun one. Don't go anywhere, folks. Let's talk a little bit first about this kind of a concept that's been thrown around by coach of the Colorado Buffaloes, Deion Sanders, obviously a notable NFL career with that golden jacket. He thinks that teams should look into potentially scrimmaging each other. Okay. And now remember, right now, this is not allowed by the NCAA. They cannot practice each other, these NCAA teams, in spring practice. That is simply not allowed. But I do think that this is a great idea, and I'll get into more of that in a second. But as far as the actual kind of script that Deion laid out, he said, hey, I think we should do it just like the NFL, couple practices, and then maybe a scrimmage at the end. And I do think, I know that head coach of Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy, is kind of in this wavelength where you can have, tickets for that scrimmage go towards each team's NIL funds. Maybe $25 per person is the number that Mike Gundy threw out. And, it's a relatively cheap entry fee. It adds up across the whole fan base, and those go directly to the players, or at least to the collective, the NIL, whatever the case might be, however it's going to be structured. I think that's a great way for the fans to directly get to see, yes, what's going on with the team, and then also support them in that. And obviously I bring up Mike Gundy because, well, the Bedlam series is kind of no more after Oklahoma moved to the SEC. And so Mike Gundy was like, hey, if we could do this during the spring, kind of like we come up, you guys come down type of deal. Then, obviously we're going to release stuff from the practices and then the scrimmages. And it's going to be this whole thing, or could be this whole thing. And that's honestly a great idea. And it leads me into, if these teams are to do these spring games, yes, you're going to have some that just don't make a ton of sense because I think that from a financial standpoint and from an actual practice standpoint, it's a amazing idea. It really is. And I'll get into that in a second. But you're also going to have like a potential for an Iowa State scrimmage, right? An Iowa State spring practice period, because they're not that far away from each other. Two top-level NCAA D1 football programs get to square off. They're only about 2 hours apart from each other. And obviously the fans are going to be engaged and involved in that. The Cyhawk game only comes around once a year in football. But if you could get a little bit of a spring action on that, a little bit of a spring games, spring scrimmage type deal, I know you would eat that up. I know I would eat that up. And I'm sure the Hawkeye fans would as well. I'm sure that they'd try to hold it over our heads in the Cyhawk rivalry. But we're probably winning that one anyway, now that the tide is turning in the state. As far as does this impact, the players' progression and readiness for games? There's a lot of coaches that are kind of yapping about this. And I also have my own opinions, but I'll bring up Taylor Mauser, Iowa State's OC, kind of asked about it and said, I think this is a great idea. I love it. I'm a competitor. It'd be awesome to get to play someone else. Keep it basic. Don't scheme it up too much. You get young guys some reps and some different looks. Yes, there are going to be concerns of injury and just how much contact is in these is a big question mark. Is it kind of thud them up? Is it two-hand touch? What does it look like? But I think this is a great answer to getting some of those live repetitions in against an opponent who is going to push you to your limit, as opposed to a teammate who you've practiced 15 times already this spring session, and there's just not too much left in that bucket, right? 5-gallon buckets only hold 5 gallons. If you bring a whole nother 5-gallon bucket to the table, it's an entirely different conversation. That's what I always like to say. And so I think that this could be, and obviously for the freshmen, but for the whole team, an opportunity for them to get jazzed up and to bring some new life into this spring ball before you go into the summer. And obviously that's full blown, not that it isn't now, but full blown preparation for the fall season that is kind of coming right around the corner, obviously, for Iowa State and their week 0 game against Kansas State. Now, the logistics of a spring scrimmage like this and being obviously allowed by the NCAA, it feels like we might just be a long ways away. I'm going to be completely honest, but the noise early is always, something that you have to take into consideration. Who's saying it? What are they saying? Is it reasonable? And I think what's been laid out and by who, I think this is something that the NCAA could allow. And just maybe not this year, obviously, because I don't think the NCAA has ever acted that fast, except for maybe on the Kenny Pickett fake slide rule. I think that one was enacted pretty quickly. But outside of that, the NCAA seems to take a while to get these kinds of things done. So this could be a couple of years down the road. But this is a great opportunity also, and I hate to use it in this way, but with roster limits being lower than ever, this could be a great competition opportunity to kind of see the guys in action, as opposed to kind of having to guess, right, based on what they've seen in practice and how they match up against their teammates, right? When you see the same guys over and over and over, maybe they pick up on some patterns. Maybe they figure out what you're really bad at and they can exploit that to get their position secured, as opposed to if you're going up against a different team, couple practices, then maybe a scrimmage at the end of it. Maybe the scrimmage isn't so much where the evaluation is being drawn, because maybe it is just thought about. Maybe it is just two-hand touch, and it's more of an opportunity to just kind of see things in live action in front of some fans, some NIL opportunities, whatever the case might be. But in these practices, right, you have all the opportunities in front of you. And this is what we've talked about on the NFL side for years, why these joint practices are so successful and why Deion obviously is mentioning them, because you can kind of simulate your way through a game, but with a coach's whistle, as opposed to a referee's whistle. You can set up a third and 10 from your own side of the field. You can set up a 4th and long, a 1st and long after a holding penalty from this spot on the field. We can do a 2-minute drill from the 40. We can do a 2-minute drill with a good kick return, right? You can manipulate the game and set up these situations in which you can put guys in those situations and just see how they respond to that. So I think that this is a great opportunity. Yes, obviously, with those situations and against new faces who are going to try to take you out, right? That's that whole new level of competition. That's a great opportunity for growth for everyone involved, but also the evaluation of not just going up against the same people every day. Obviously, Taylor Mauser mentioned, like, I just don't want to keep going up against this same defense over and over and over, because, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I am not going to lie to you. John Heacock, good at defensive coordination. Okay. And so, yes, we already knew that. Obviously, Iowa State in a great spot there. But, it's you just kind of see the same things over and over. And it's hard to get a really fresh look for these players and to get a great evaluation. Obviously, you're going to get a really solid evaluation. That's why these coaches are coaches. That's what they're good at. I'm not saying that it's just impossible for them to figure anything out right now, but you add an extra layer to that cake. And I think that helps in multiple fronts. I really do. Obviously, the evaluation process, obviously, with the development of these players, especially the young players. And then also when you factor in the NIL deal, I think the Iowa State one is very much worth considering. Then you could even look to teams like maybe for Iowa State, Toledo, with Matt Campbell's ties. You could go all around the room, right? Does it stay in the same conference? Does it do we do cross conference like the Big Ten and the SEC are so inclined to do with even regular season games? Those questions I can't answer right now, but I think on a base level, what we've heard, this concept is unbelievable. I think this is very applicable, and I don't see very many negatives to come of this. Now, it will kind of depend on what the NCAA will allow at the end of the day. And also, you want to make sure that the players stay healthy, because Iowa State certainly went through some injuries last year, and I think that was part of the reason they fell short in the Big 12 championship game. Obviously, the defensive side of the ball more than anything. But on the offensive side of the ball, Taylor Mauser had something very interesting to say about the Big 12 championship game and how last year went. We're talking about that coming up right after this. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery, and now I budget smarter and save more. And managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Iowa State and spring football are the best things that can be put in a sentence together. I know, obviously, it's what we're going to be talking about today. Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. How could you honestly talk about anything else? I don't know if that's even this is the best thing ever. I know that like the MLB was potentially yesterday, but we're here talking about the Cyclones. Okay, we're not really so much worried about baseball here at Iowa State. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball because there's a lot going on here on offense. Yes, I mentioned some defensive injuries, but also offensive injuries as well, and a couple key offensive departures. And so all of this that I'm going to be pulling from was Taylor Mauser's kind of press availability yesterday. Had a lot of very interesting things to say. And overall, there were some key points that I thought he was kind of focused on. I thought that was where he thought this team could excel. And overall, it sounds like very high optimism inside the building. I think that that's a great sign. Not that there wouldn't be high optimism at this point in the season, but it's better to feel like that than to just guess that there is probably optimism, if that makes sense. The first position group that everyone kind of talks about is the tight end position group because of the injuries last year. Cooper Alexander, a name that gets thrown around immediately. But the depth at this tight end position is going to be a real deal here for the Cyclones. And Cooper, Mr. Alexander, is one that got brought up multiple times. For one, his level of versatility from the offense, obviously for this offense, and it's going to be a great success point for this, I would say, offense from a receiver standpoint. That was the main kind of point. And he obviously Mauser mentioned hey, if he wouldn't have got hurt, he probably would have played last year as a freshman. So very much a talented player. And then you look at the rest of the depth at the tight end position. You got Benjamin Bramer, Trip Walsh at 6'6", 235, redshirt sophomore. Tyler Moore in there. Shout out Tyler Moore. This is a pretty Gabe Burkle, everything he did last year and the major jump that he made. This is a really loaded tight end room with as it's listed right now, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 guys on there. And so I think that's a position where Iowa State can really kind of tear up the defense and something that they're going to be looking into immediately, obviously, at this point. But I do think that this, as it sits right now, basically just looking at that and then also what these coaches are saying, look out for the tight ends this year and look out for, there is some moving around. Obviously, you go from slot to maybe more of a lineman type role, whatever the case might be. But in the passing game, I think the tight ends can really tear things up. And then obviously, what's the other kind of half? Well, I'd say it's a half. What's the other half of the passing game? Wide receivers, right? So wide receivers, I'd say about 50%. Tight ends, maybe like that 35-ish, like a third, and the rest maybe goes to running backs. Let me know how you'd split up the offensive receiving game down below. But all that to say, that half, the wide receivers, there were some very big, nice, very, I was going to say pleasant, but I don't think that's mean enough. They were very confident words coming for this wide receiver room. And what I thought was really a good sign was that both transfers were mentioned. Okay, obviously Chase Soule and Xavier Townsend, two dogs that we talked about as soon as they jumped in the portal and were headed over here to Ames. And I think that this is really, really good news that they are being mentioned right away. I mean, like pretty much right out of the gate for this team for being first in, last out type of guys, constantly at the facility, getting as many reps in and getting as much preparation in as they possibly can. That's what you want from your wide receivers. And so I do think that this is what I was kind of talking about with Higgins and Knoll, and what they kind of um, brought to this team, what they can bring to this team moving forward. Now everyone kind of knows. Obviously, Chase and Xavier weren't in the building last year, but Chase Ole kind of models himself after Higgins, and they've, I'm sure, had conversations. But there's an element of like, this is what it takes to be successful if you're going to be a wide receiver at Iowa State. This is what it takes to be a duo of wide receivers that is arguably the best in the entire nation and the only one over 1,100 yards. This is a standard. This is where we're at right now. This is the big deal that kind of came out of obviously the success last season was amazing, but moving forward, that was my point. Like these guys making noise in the draft, these guys making noise at their pro days and whatnot. It's just going to help with recruitment of that wide receiver position. And I think that's a big deal. And so obviously the mentioning of Soule and Townsend, two very promising signs, is obviously we've mentioned the relationship between Xavier Townsend and Rocco, and we'll get to Rocco in a second. Don't worry. And I was really high on that already. And then what they're saying that Chase Soule could do and could be, that's even more exciting. Then I heard some great points on the radio about Eli Green not getting a lot last year as far as attention or targets or time really on the field. But also you got to remember some of the best wide receivers out there. So be kind of on the lookout for Green and Alston and some of these other guys, the big long list of wide receivers. But obviously Green is kind of on my list. I would put Soule and Townsend ahead of them as far as Green and Alston. But don't be surprised if they make a significant amount more noise this year than last, just because of how good Knoll and Higgins were and how much of that target share they took up. I think that's it's only fair, right? It's got to go somewhere. And so, kind of wrapping up the wide receivers here, Mauser said, I'm not expecting a big fall off at all. They've seen what elite talent, elite preparation looks like and what it takes to be great in this conference. So, like I said, I think that was a direct result of what Knoll and Higgins were able to do. And obviously, we've talked about Noah Pauley and his ability to coach these wide receivers. I expect great things from the wide receivers just as a whole. And then the other, obviously, like I said, third-ish of receiving is the running back room. And not a whole lot of words coming from this running back room from Mauser. Really just kind of said should be dynamic. There's a lot of experience here. Also mentioned the tight end room again there. A lot of names jumping off the board for wide receiver, but it wasn't like, anything wild. Obviously mentioned Abu Sama, mentioned Carson Hansen, mentioned Dylan Lee, I believe. I'm not quite sure if it was Dylan Lee or Miller that he mentioned, but either way, like basically what he said was these freshmen don't look like freshmen. These juniors don't look like juniors. They look like they're ahead of where they should be. And that's a great thing if you are wanting to be an Iowa State running back in the future, or if you're a big fan of the run game right now, I suppose. And the run game is really important, right? We know that, especially with the NFL kind of transition towards the kind of bolstering of the run game in today's offense. And finally, I'll kind of round things out here with the offensive line. This one was an interesting one. Obviously, you lose Hufford and Travis. There's a couple moves that might be made around the offensive line. But the kind of the pair of guys that everyone's talking about right now are the Helton twins, Wade and Brent Helton from Corona, California, two redshirt freshmen there coming back. You got to make some noise. They really are. And I think, this is kind of where I pulled from the offensive line. Mauser said, can't be as good as we want to be on fourth down like we were last year if we don't have an elite center who can take care of nose guards. Those guys know if you're going to be the center in this offense, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that, and you have to be ready to eat nails. Okay, I kind of wish you would have thrown in there chew glass if you're going to go with the eat nails, but I get it. Sometimes you got to keep it short and sweet. This is exactly the kind of mindset I want for my offensive lineman, for my obviously offensive coordinated coach. That's what you want these guys to be, right? They're just tough, not a lot of words out, kind of listening. based and really just plowing guys into the dirt. And if that's the mentality they're going with here, I think that's some good protection for Rocco Becht. And then that's going to open up lanes. If we're going into this with the mindset of let's just literally be the toughest people on the entire field, and there's a lot of responsibility with this position because I think a lot of people overlook the offensive line until it's going poorly. And then it's like, oh, maybe we should address our offensive line. Like, yeah, we probably should. And so that's a great sign. I did like that. There have been conversations that I've heard kind of obviously with Brendan Black, just in general. Mauser mentioned that he's a big, nasty, physical offensive lineman. He knows what it's all about as far as playing offensive line for Iowa State. I've heard kind of rumblings of maybe he's getting moved around. I can't tell you for sure, but I think that Iowa State, the line is obviously a point of emphasis this year, and one I think that Iowa State can really kind of flourish in, and we can see some really great offense moving forward just because of great offensive line play on top of what we were going to potentially see from the wide receivers and such. And then last point here on the offense, Rocco, just not a whole lot of words, but definitely the ones that were chosen were very high on his ability to lead. There was no, doesn't really matter how long you've been here, very high level of expectation. The standard is the standard. And everybody, Mauser said, as great as the year was last year, we still have a sour taste in our mouth after how that Big 12 championship game went. The big quote from this was he talked about he put the confetti from the field onto his desk. He sees it every day in his office. He's reminded of what it was like in that situation, just how badly it went, and how much potential they had, and unfortunately where they ended up at the end of that game as the clock hit zeros. And so I think that this team is really just fired up, really motivated at this point in time, and everybody's fresh with it right now, which is always a good sign. Speaking of fresh, the defense looks all new, completely rejuvenated. We're going to talk about that coming up right after this. We're all about the stats because numbers don't lie. And when it comes to the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers are on an MVP level. With the ability to tow up to 8,500 pounds, it can quite literally carry the whole team, plus the gear, wherever you need to go. It's powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro 4X is built for big crews, big adventures, and even bigger memories. Whether you're off exploring the off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, and style wherever you go. Take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Iowa State football is the conversation right now. Obviously, here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We've gone through this potential for a spring scrimmage. What would that look like? What could happen there? Is that a good idea? And then we talked a little bit about the offense and all of the potential on that side of the ball. Now it's time to move to the defense. Okay, obviously, defense wins championships, and so we have to spend some time talking about it. And when asked about it, John Heacock had some answers. That is for sure. The first one, the first position that really was addressed was the linebacker position for the most part because of the injuries last year. It's pretty hard to deny that the defense in general for Iowa State, but obviously the linebacker room was pretty beat up. Very much some big names missing in Caleb Bacon, but also just a lot of guys in general. And so after kind of talking about what that meant for the team last year and the kind of the impact that had and whatnot, I did think those were valid answers, kind of just along the lines of, the guys stepped up. It was a no excuse mentality, rock and roll, kind of typical coach speak there, but, definitely valid answers given the situation. Kind of started talking about what to expect this year, especially with so many great linebackers kind of coming back here. I mean, you got a solid 2, 3, 4 guys at the top of this list here. And so, Coach John kind of said, like, hey, we're going to be moving these guys around, right? Like Will, Sam, Mike. If you can play the Will, you can play the Sam, vice versa. We'll put you in the Mike position, kind of see how things go, and really put the players where they can best succeed. And I think that's a really great mindset here is you want to put these guys all over and kind of see where they fit best, but also what they're capable of handling. What kind of situations can you put them in? And that's a conversation we're going to be coming back to soon. Don't worry. But first thing, as far as guys handling new kind of situations, Benny Nyogi transitioning to DB is on everybody's radar right now. Obviously, mostly because of Darian Porter, DP, as coach calls him. The transition from wide receiver to DB, it's not one in football that is like super wild. I think it's a relatively understood one just because of the nature of the two positions, the similarities between them, even though there are many differences for sure. But in general, the defense is kind of trying to run the offense's route just without knowing what it is, and then making a slight adjustment at the end to make a play on the ball, right? That's at a very basic level, you can kind of make that assumption. So very similar, and takes a very similar type of person to play both those positions. Why the transition from wide receiver to DB isn't exactly like, it's not like he's going from nose tackle to the team starting wide receiver, right? Like there you can draw the parallels between the two, but nonetheless, Benny Nyogi, some high praise from coach, said he's maybe further along than DP was at this point in time. So hey, a lot of time left on the clock here. Okay, a lot of things that still have to happen. But this is a great sign, not only for Benny, but also for Iowa State secondary as a whole. If we can get another DP back there, in the great pass defense that we had, that's great news. It really is. And then on top of hopefully what I would imagine is the elevation in play from the defensive line, that only makes it easier to be a great secondary. And then as a whole unit, now you're cooking with gas. Okay, now you're in a great situation. And so to transition towards that defensive line, Dominique Orange is a player that coach was asked about. Obviously a big name, big splash kind of return, kind of mentioned in his presser and saying like, hey, I had more left on the plate, more left in the tank. I have unfinished business. I got to come back and prove myself, kind of thing. Just felt like he didn't quite give it his all last year is kind of what I got from his comments. And he wanted to show what he's capable of doing. And so that's obviously awesome. Let's see some elevation in play. Let's show the Cyclones, obviously, what you're capable of doing. And then in the same sentence, you can show the pros what you're capable of doing. And so when coach was kind of asked about that whole situation, basically what he said was Orange needs to move from a 3 to a 4 out of 10 play guy to a 70% of the time to that 7-8 times out of 10 player. And that's really where the difference. It's not so much in those 3-4 plays that Orange needs to get significantly better. Obviously, he can always get better, and that's kind of what coach was getting at. But it's more so elevating or I guess playing more of those plays per drive, right? Being out there for longer. So in an 11-play drive, are you only playing 3 of those? Are you playing 7? How many are you playing? How many are you playing at full speed? These are the types of questions we need to answer. And, coach obviously said he's one of our best defensive linemen, potentially the best defensive lineman, and we need to get him to that point, and he knows that. And so he basically laid out like he knows what's going on. We know what's going on, what the standard is, what the expectation is moving forward, what we're going to do to get to that point. Asked if it was a conditioning type of deal. He said, hey, a little bit, but also just like there's a lot of things going around that situation. And so I don't think kind of my vibe from that was not so much that like Dominique Orange is really, really close to being the best defensive player in the Big 12. I didn't get that from that conversation. What I got from it, though, is there's a very clear plan of action. We know what kind of Orange is capable of for short bursts. Let's just extend those bursts into 7-8 plays, and it's going to be basically unstoppable this Iowa State Cyclones defense. And so I think that's a great, like, I don't know exactly what the plan of action is that they're going to take, but at least there is one. There is an emphasis on that. And I think the Iowa State, the defensive line, yes, and then the defensive half of the ball as a whole will benefit massively from this. As I mentioned, with the secondary, then stuff and runs, and with the boost at linebacker, things are looking up for this Iowa State defense after last year. A lot of conversation of ability to stop the run. Where are we at there? Yes, the pass defense is solid, but like the run bends a lot, and we're kind of giving up some points here. And Iowa State's offense is really going to need to step up. I don't think that's going to be the case so much this year if this team can't stay healthy. And then, the last point I want to make here is, Coach was kind of asked about leadership. Obviously, you lose DP, JR, Bo, a lot of really big leaders on this team. And he wasn't really able to say, like, hey, these are the guys that have stepped up, will step up. But it's also extremely early on in the season, so I'm not too worried about it. And he mentioned, like, hey, coach is going to create chaos in practice, and we're going to see how they handle it. Okay, these are the guys that are at the front of the room now, not the back. They got to be able to step up. They got to be the ones with the voice in the room. They're the ones that are making the decisions out on the field. Let's see who does it. And I think that's a great spot for this team to be in. A lot of growth mindset here, and so much potential in front of them. This team could be so absolutely off the charts good just based on the amount of returners, right? It's not like we needed to bring in a ton of new transfers. Like, we just needed to get guys back from injury. I think this team is absolutely in a great spot moving forward. That being said, if you're still listening, be sure you subscribe so we can prove once and for all it is, in fact, Cyclone State. Obviously, this football team will try to help us out with that. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.